Good Monday morning, and thanks for listening to my musing today, which is about, of all things, evil. More specifically, I have one question. What are we supposed to do in response to evil? And by we, I might mean individuals, I might mean the church, I might mean society at large. Interpret it as you will. In the Sermon on the Mount, Jesus says, "Do not resist an evil person." It's elsewhere that Jesus says, "Don't resist evil with evil," and maybe we take that a little better than "don't resist evil" overall. Maybe fighting fire with fire is not always the best method. But that's not exactly what we see in Matthew 5. Jesus says, "Do not resist an evil person. If a person strikes you on the one cheek, turn to him or her the other also." And so maybe that makes some sense. Probably you've heard some sermons about that. But generally, the notion that we don't resist evil, that we don't resist evil people, seems to be fairly contradictory to why we are in the religious business in the first place. We are to connect for the sake of justice, peace, eradicating evil. I mean, when we're baptized, one of the baptismal questions that we answer is, do we renounce evil in the world? And yet we still have this word, "do not resist an evil person," that causes at least me to say, "Jesus, what are you talking about? I thought that was kind of the whole point." I bring that up because it was just a couple of weeks ago that New York City announced that it would be the first site in the United States to have a safe consumption site, an SCS. What is a safe consumption site? It means that in a very particular area, people are able to use any drug he or she wants without repercussions. Perhaps on the surface that sounds nuts. Why would you say that a drug is illegal, except for in this one little space you can do absolutely whatever you want? Legal or illegal, medical cannabis card or not, heroin, cocaine, whatever you want. Doesn't that start to sound a little bit like that terrible movie series, The Purge? Here in one area, anything goes. The question that I have related to evil is whether it is our personal or our collective church or our collective social responsibility to either A, eliminate evil, or B, curtail evil. I think how we, meaning we individually, we as the church, or we collectively and societally choose to answer that question has a major impact on the actions that we take. If we seek to eliminate evil in all of its forms, then something like a safe consumption site where drug use is allowed seems nonsensical. But if the job is to curtail evil, to reduce its impact, then a safe consumption site where people can be overseen by sober and right-minded people. People have access to clean needles rather than dirty needles. People who have tendencies to OD have quick access to medical care. Well, then the results of hard drug use, like death by OD or infection because of dirty needles, well, those evils are curtailed. On the one hand, if we seek to eliminate it, something like a safe consumption site makes absolutely no sense. It should be dramatically opposed. Why would anyone think of it in the first place? If, on the other hand, our job is to curtail evil, to serve and minister to people who have those sorts of needs, maybe it makes sense to have a safe consumption site. Assuming that evil will exist, but we can help people who have dependencies, chemical needs, then maybe it makes more sense. I'm repeating myself, I think. Drug use isn't the only place where the option to fight fire with fire is an option. To resist evil, potentially with evil, happens. This decision that we have either to seek the elimination of evil or to curtail evil plays itself out in a lot of different arenas. Maybe in a fun sort of way, around our worst vices, around sexuality, around drug use. You can think of prohibition, where if drinking is bad, no one should do it, and it should be completely illegal, which, of course, as you probably know, gives rise to organized crime and bootlegging and all sorts of trouble. Socially, we stepped back on that and said, you know what, if there's a few places where you can get a drink and that's regulated, maybe that's better. Regulation, curtailing evil, these are the things that I've been musing about based on the news of the United States' first safe consumption site. There are a few more examples where thinking about curtailing evil rather than eliminating it comes to play, even in current contemporary issues. I can talk about those contemporary issues, and I will a little bit, but I also want us to help frame it, at least based on my frame, based on the things I've been thinking and musing about this past week. So if you want to hear more about sex and drug use, then why don't you stick around? I don't know about how you grew up. I grew up in a Southern Baptist youth group. I think in the minds of the parents of that youth group, at least what was preached on most Sunday mornings, the idea was to eliminate all evil, or at least eliminate all notions of sexuality at any point in any teenager's life. I don't know how well that worked whenever girls are swimming around in dark t-shirts over bikinis, and it kind of accentuates what we're not supposed to be thinking about, because I would think, that's a funny way to swim. It looks like you're about to drown in your dad's oversized, used black Metallica t-shirt. I don't know if Metallica t-shirts are better than the girls with midriffs showing, or what the case may be. You'd have to ask my old youth directors. The point is, when it comes to sexuality, there is another arena where we think or socially argue about the place of birth control, contraceptives, and abortion rights. If the idea, not the idea, if the ideal is two loving parents, happily married, rearing their children, and that is the only way, the only good place for families to happen, then abstinence-only education might be the way to go. Condoms available to teenagers, birth control available to teenagers, or day-after pills that might help prevent people who make certain sexual decisions, they don't have any place, because, as the argument goes, you're giving permission or off-ramps to the evils that exist about teenaged sexuality. The other argument, if it's not to eliminate evil, but to curtail evil, to help people in moments of what might be called bad decisions, mean that a condom or other forms of birth control, say sex among teenagers, has happened more or less forever. If we acknowledge that, whether we like it or not, we can help prevent unwanted or unplanned pregnancies. Then you have quite a number of methods that say we are curtailing what people don't want. We're seeing that argument play out even right now, even in the Supreme Court, about Roe v. Wade and abortive rights, whether there are sorts of off-ramps for people who face the consequences of their actions and would like not to face those same consequences. And so that's a rather hot topic that you probably won't hear me musing about ever, except to say it's important for us to think about whether, when people are talking about policies, procedures, the things that the church does and doesn't do, the way society acts and doesn't act, I think we miss the overriding question: are we seeking to eradicate evil or curtail it? Even before a safe consumption site was proposed in New York, there have been multiple sites in multiple cities about clean needle exchanges, the idea being if people are intravenous drug users, they would be able to exchange dirty needles in a safe, disposable way, exchange them for clean needles. So even though they are using intravenous drugs, which is bad, it would not be the case that they are faced with HPV, AIDS, other diseases that are transmitted by sharing quote-unquote dirty needles. And so if you take all things being equal, people will use, say, heroin, but you can change whether their needles are clean or not. Perhaps this is a way of curtailing evil. I think by this point you basically get the idea of the mindset behind curtailing evil. I don't know, in terms of numbers, if that's the right way to go about thinking about what is good and bad social, ethical policy. There are differences in the schools of thought about ethics. One, deontological ethics, says that we have a duty to resist evil in all of its forms, that we should not condone certain behaviors, whatever those behaviors might be, and therefore the right thing to do is not to in any way encourage bad behavior. That's a fairly reasonable way of thinking. You wouldn't want to support, incentivize, or encourage bad behavior. But on the other hand, there are utilitarian ethics or consequentialist ethics that say it's not about our duties, it's about improving certain numbers. We want to reduce overdose rates, we want to reduce unwanted pregnancies, and by the numbers, we have policies that will improve those bad numbers. We can decrease unwanted pregnancies, we can decrease death by overdose or ER visits because of overdose. If only we had the right resources, spaces, options for people who deal in those sorts of behaviors. I don't know how much those large and basic questions are presented to society at large, and I imagine that people disagree about what the right thing to do is, if we are to eradicate evil or if we are to curtail it, if we should be bound by duty and responsibility to live towards what is right always and forever without budging, or if compromise is a good word for us, that basing things on the numbers, overdoses, unwanted pregnancies being the two examples I've talked about today, that's what we should focus on. And the lower we get those numbers, the better we are. How should we focus our attention? What sorts of policies play into those two schools of thought? And as always, how do people who see those issues differently converse and decide between one another? Specific to the safe consumption site, there's an issue between state law and federal law, so that even if New York decides that it is a good idea to have a safe consumption site, if there is a federal law enforcement official, like the Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms Agency, who says this is bad and we need to do something to intervene, they are within their rights. I imagine this might go to court sometime, but they would ostensibly be within their rights to shut things down, to arrest people, to do all sorts of things that override the sense that perhaps in the city of New York there should be safe consumption sites. Where do you face issues where you don't know whether to compromise on your values, even if the promise of curtailing evil, improving some circumstances by the numbers, is really promising? Where do you find places to say, absolutely no way, we can't give in to that sort of thinking? And where do you say, we've got to improve by the numbers? What other issues arise for you on that front in your own life? I know that Sarah and I are losing the utilitarian battle of screen time with our daughter. It's awfully nice when we have our cup of coffee and we can talk about absolutely anything if we just let Gwenny watch 30 minutes of Disney Plus on Dad's phone while Good Morning America plays and we sip our coffee. That's a battle I think we've lost, and we're pretty happy about it. So I don't know for you in your workaday world how these issues might emerge or how you frame some of these questions. But I do think they're important. One way or another, there are times and places where it makes sense to me to call certain behaviors evil. Not necessarily drug use or procreation or birth control or those sorts of things, but in other places, I say, man, some people's behavior is incredibly bad. How we understand whether we are to pursue the elimination of those behaviors or where we're supposed to compromise, I think answering that question first really would direct the ways that we move and work to try and see that we do, as our baptismal vows say, renounce evil and its power in the world. Jesus said, "Do not resist evil. If someone strikes you, turn the other cheek." This has always been a difficult saying of Jesus, from the initial hearers to us today. Walter Wink and others have preached quite a bit provocatively about how that might mean something in context, how it gives dignity to people, how it helps people to understand how evil works and what our ways of resisting or not resisting might be. It was Tolstoy who read that line in the Sermon on the Mount that eventually led to correspondence with Gandhi and then Martin Luther King, Gandhi with King, Tolstoy and King didn't overlap, about nonviolence, non-resistance being ostensibly the same thing. And so that somehow by not resisting violence, they were able to resist evil of colonial rule in India and then segregation, Jim Crow in the United States. Somehow by not resisting, they resisted powerfully. I don't know what that has to do with safe consumption sites in New York City or what that means for what I'm supposed to be doing about my screen time for my daughter. But those are the things I've been musing about this week. I hope you have an excellent week. It is getting very close to Christmas, so despite talking about evil, I hope that you do have a sense of hope, joy, peace, and love that is growing with you in a sense of the Christmas spirit this year. Thanks for listening to my musing. I'll see you next Monday.